'Twas the night before the Wolftime, and all through the rout not a creature was stirring, not even a
"There are no wolves on Fenris."
I am just kidding, of course. The Space Wolves are no more Christmassy than any other Space Marine chapter. Anyway, this is their chapter master, Logan Grimnar. Nope, hang on. This is their chapter master, Logan Grimnar, the Great Wolf. Today we're going to talk about him because he is actually an epic character and one of the mightiest of the Sons of Russ. Even as a recruit, others, and especially Ulrich, thought he had a mighty weird or destiny, and he served for over 100 years before becoming chapter master. He was noted for not just being an incredible combatant, but also for his charisma and ability. In fact, he's one of the most jovial or jolly chapter masters that you'll ever see, always ready to drink with any of his brothers. After ascending to the title of Great Wolf, one of the first major challenges that he had was during and after the First War of Armageddon. This hive world came under attack from Chaos forces, which were led by Angron, the Primarch of the World Eaters, and his elite bodyguard of 12 bloodthirsters. It was in this war that Grimnar got his fabled weapon, the Axe Morkai. The Axe's original wielder, the KHORNATE champion Acor Doomflayer, engaged Grimnar in combat after slaughtering some of his Wolfguard. The Chaos champion was a savage opponent, and in the battle he shattered Grimnar's Frostblade into 1,000,000 pieces. However, Grimnar was not done yet. With a clawed hand he managed to rip the helm off of the champion, and then he sank his teeth into Doomflayer's neck. As the champion of Khorne died, Grimnar picked up his axe and then fought with it for the rest of the campaign. Then later, back on Fenris, it was reforged into the Axe Morkai. In this war, Grimnar also proved himself as a shrewd tactician. Unlike many a Space Wolf who would want to charge straight for Angron and engage him, he actually held back. Leading the Imperial defenders, he held the line against the many waves of Chaos forces, and when the time was right, he let out a mighty howl, which was the signal. Grey Knight Terminators teleported in between Angron and his Bloodthirsters, and these demon hunters were the key to the Imperium's victory that day. So during the First War of Armageddon, we get a really good base understanding of the character of Logan Grimnar. He is of course an excellent but savage fighter, and just like his genefather Leman Russ, you might look at him and think he's just a beast, but secretly he's actually a tactical genius. However, for me it is his actions post the War of Armageddon that we get a true measure of the man that is Logan Grimnar. The average civilian is not aware of the existence of chaos and demons, and in fact most in the Imperium have no idea that during the Horus Heresy it was actually the sons of the Emperor of Mankind himself who turned against him. Should this information ever get out, it could lead to panic and further corruption, and the Inquisition consider it part of their duty to make sure this doesn't happen. And so after the War of Armageddon, the Inquisition arrived, and they decided the local populace had this dangerous information and they must be quarantined and sterilized. The Space Wolves and the Inquisition already did not get along, and Grimnar suspected this was coming, and so he made it clear the Space Wolves would not play a part in this action. He had grown sympathetic to the Armageddon Steel Legion and the local populace, and even tried to structure the defense so that as few as possible would learn the truth of their enemy. He did raise this with the Inquisitorial Task Force when they met, however his pleas were ignored. The Inquisitors were adamant that strict measures be taken so that word of the truth not reach the wider Imperium. The Lord Inquisitor Kisneros, who was in charge of the containment, started the first phase, where civilians were evacuated through temporary security measures and the sterilization started. To begin with, all the Space Wolves did was help the defenders and civilians flee. However, eventually things took a turn for the worse, as the Grey Knights fired the first shots and many Space Wolves and civilians were killed. Because of Grimnar's actions, many of the survivors of Armageddon were saved. However, remember, this is Warhammer 40K, and so these actions actually led to far more people dying. Kisneros was determined and gave the order that anyone who came into contact with the survivors of Armageddon be purged, and multiple worlds of the Imperium even suffered exterminatus. The Grey Knights even named the period the Months of Shame. The Space Wolves had still not retaliated at this point, however things were about to get much, much worse. Grandmaster Joros of the Grey Knights recommended a plan to Kisneros. If they could capture Grimnar, they could force the Space Wolves to surrender. A parley was organised in Hykeran, a neutral star system. However, the Lord Inquisitor was not taking any chances. After the Space Wolves' vessels translated into real space, the Inquisitorial force opened fire. 4 of the vessels were destroyed and the flagship was damaged, and so Grimnar was invited to come and surrender. The Great Wolf and his 3 remaining Wolfguard went aboard the Fire of Dawn, and they stood in the presence of the entire Grey Knights detachment. Grimnar demanded to know who broke the sacred Oath of Armistice, and Joros said he hoped for forgiveness someday. However, it was he who gave the order. But forgiveness was not forthcoming that day, so much as the Axe Morkai. Joros was a famed fighter amongst the Grey Knights, said to have incredible reaction speeds, yet he scarcely got his blades out of their scabbards before the axe of the Chapter Master was in his neck and chestplate. Then, after felling 4 more Grey Knights, the Space Wolves were able to teleport back to safety. After this interaction, the Wolves gave no quarter, slaughtered their once allies, and even destroyed the glaive of Janus, the flagship of the Grey Knights' First Brotherhood, a vessel they had had in their arsenal for 10,000 years. As things escalated, the Red Hunters chapter were brought in to support the Inquisition. However, dissent within the Inquisitorial force started to rise. Additionally, the containment strategy of the Inquisition was considered a failure, as too many civilians had made their way out of the system. The Lord Inquisitor had one desperate gambit left to try. He could siege Fenris, hold the planet hostage, and force the Space Wolves to give in. The Lord Inquisitor had Fenris surrounded, and whilst there was very little left to defend the planet, Kisneros was in command of a significant Inquisitorial and Grey Knight force and the entire Red Hunters chapter fleet, so he demanded that a senior Space Wolf come negotiate. When he and his delegation arrived at the Fang, the famed fortress monastery of the Space Wolves, they were met by none other than Bjorn the Fell-Handed. With the Inquisition's orbital guns locked on the Fang, the ancient Space Wolf did not give in to the demands, and it wasn't long before Logan Grimnar and the rest of the Space Wolves chapter fleet arrived in the system. As a naval battle broke out around Fenris, a panicked Kisneros returned to his ship to take command. Grimnar and his Wolfguard were able to teleport onto the battlecruiser, and despite Grey Knight resistance, Grimnar was able to swiftly decapitate Kisneros. This was not enough to quench the rage of the sons of Leman Russ, however, and the battle raged until Bjorn the Fell-Handed teleported onto the battlecruiser and demanded everybody stop this madness. We learn a lot about Logan Grimnar in the First War of Armageddon and its aftermath. We learn he really values honour, he's willing to risk the lives of himself and the other Space Wolves in order to protect those who he has fought besides, and the idea that someone would break the sacred Oath of Armistice is abhorrent to him. Then, once his temper has flared, you do not want to stand against him. Both the Space Wolves and the Grey Knights really underestimate each other in this story. However, it is very impressive that Grimnar was able to kill a Grand Master of the Grey Knights, and I think this story really proves he is one of the greatest champions of humanity. Many years later, the wrath of Magnus found the Space Wolves once again, and the Crimson King orchestrated the siege of Fenris. Tzeentch was not the only god looking for conquest here, however, as there were many and varied servants of chaos. Magnus used a plague created by his brother Mortarion to overrun the planet Midgardia, and it was covered in a poisonous greenhouse gas. Grimnar led his forces in an attempt to reclaim the planet, but failed. Even Exterminatus wasn't enough to completely remove the taint, and so with a heavy heart, the chapter master of the Space Wolves ordered Midgardia, the sister world of Fenris, to be utterly destroyed by blowing out the planet's core using a warhead called Morkai's Tooth. Fenris itself suffered from a personal attack from Magnus and his 1,000 sons, and Grimnar returned to the planet in order to lead the defense. The Space Wolves did not stand alone, however. The Grey Knights and the Dark Angels put aside their old grievances with the Wolves, and they fought as allies. Magnus took a terrible toll on the planet and its defenders, and only by the sacrifice of Egil Ironwolf was Logan Grimnar able to drive the Axe Morkai into the demon Primarch. Having been originally forged as a weapon of Khorne, the bane of sorcerers, the axe is still imbued with some of his power, therefore it was able to shatter the arcane defences of Magnus. Grimnar's blow allowed the purifiers of the Grey Knights to banish Magnus, the Thousand Sons, and their demonic allies back into the warp. The idea of the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves fighting together here is absolutely awesome to me. The story of the Lion and the Wolf is one of an ancient rivalry between the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels. There have been times the two factions have come to blows. During the 13th Black Crusade, however, the two factions put aside their differences. Because of Grimnar's esteemed reputation, he was put as the supreme commander of the Imperial forces at the Cadian Gate. Once more he fought alongside Supreme Grandmaster Azrael and the Dark Angels. It is said to look upon the Wolves and the Angels fighting together is to look upon a force that none can match. However, as things tend to do in 40k, this peace did not last long, and they left each other as rivals once more. Nevertheless, with so many rumours about the Dark Angels and the Lion floating around, I think it's a very exciting time to be a Space Wolves fan, as I think if the Dark Angels do get that key story progression, I don't think it will be too long until the Lion goes searching for his brother. Which takes us quite nicely onto our final piece of lore for today, which is the book Wolftime, a book famous for the fact that it contains almost nothing about the Wolftime. The Wolftime itself is the prophesized dark hour of the Space Wolves, where Leman Russ will return to them. If you do want the lowdown on the event of the Wolftime, basically they have some conversations in the book that can be boiled down roughly to this. Is it the Wolftime? No. Is it nearly the Wolftime? Maybe. Should we prepare for the Wolftime? Yes. Haven't we already been doing that for the last 10,000 years? Yeah, pretty much. So basically nothing has changed. I imagine this is Black Library's revenge for all of the clickbaity YouTube titles they've inevitably seen over the years. So this book does have a number of events, and the most important one is, of course, the meeting of the Great Wolf and the Avenging Sun, Roboute Guilliman. Grimnar is anti-Guilliman through most of the book. He declares him the Legion Breaker and thinks he is only there to gain power over the Space Wolves, which of course is an interesting piece of logic given the fact that Guilliman's main purpose there is to massively reinforce the Space Wolves above chapter size even and tell them that they can do whatever the hell they want. However, this reasoning does kind of make sense given that it comes from the faction that also gave us I'm going to go and fight Horus Lupercal even though I definitely cannot win, however I might be able to make him feel uncomfortable for about 10 seconds. I'm probably being a bit harsh about this story, and there is definitely some good reason for Logan Grimnar to be suspicious of Roboute Guilliman and the Primaris Marines. However, I just think there's some poor reasoning given in this book, which doesn't really make sense for me. However, I will say there is a subplot about a Primaris Marine proving himself to the Space Wolves, which is really cool, and he does gain the Great Wolf's respect. Guilliman handles the whole situation really well. He even kneels to Logan Grimnar and really demonstrates how he is the ultimate politician. But this story does really complete the picture of Logan Grimnar, because let's have a look at the facts here. He is one of the mightiest of the sons of Russ, he has one of the greatest strategic minds in the Imperium, he is a fantastic fighter wielding a KHORNATE axe, he leads a reinforced Space Wolves chapter, and is undoubtedly loyal to the Allfather.